Good morning. It's April 29, 2020, the 250th anniversary of the landing of Captain Cook's Endeavour in Botany Bay. We used to remember this day as the discovery of Australia. In more recent times it's become quite heated and controversial, and the far left-wing elements in Australia and our friends in the Indigenous communities prefer to rewrite the history and call it an invasion. I'd just like to share as best I can, being British in my background, both sides of the argument, because I don't like the fact that history is trying to be rewritten radically. Let's see if we can get to the nuts and bolts of what really happened on April 29, 1770. I regard an invasion, inverted commas, as something where people come off boats all guns blazing and many people are killed, and it's an absolute takeover. But from my research of what happened on that day, one native was wounded in the leg. And not even with gunshot that could kill. It was like firing of rubber bullets during an IRA, in the troubles of the IRA back in the 70s and 60s. So it was not a matter of trying to kill the Aborigines. They were throwing spears at them, or darts, as Captain Cook described them. So I don't know how you'd be, but if you had people throwing spears at you and they were natives and these people were strong and accurate and they weren't missing you by far, you might want to be on the defensive also. So I'm not disputing the fact that Captain Cook fired 3 shots. One as a warning sign, and the other 2 were in self-defense, but not intended to mortally wound, just to make the natives back off. Anyway, let's get to the facts of the matter, as best we all know them. And this is from the Macquarie Network, who've done some good research. And I'll also go on library research and also from some of the descendants of the actual natives, and get their sides of the story. So this might take about 10 minutes. I'll try to be as quick as I can. Captain James Cook was a British explorer, surveyor, navigator and cartographer who mapped large parts of the world, including Australia's east coast and New Zealand's North and South Islands. On the 26th of August 1768, Cook embarked on his first Pacific voyage aboard the HMB Endeavour, Her Majesty's bark Endeavour, with instructions from the Royal Society and King George III to chart the transit of Venus across the Sun at the equator. Captain Cook went on to chart New Zealand before continuing on to first sight the east coast of Australia at Point Hicks on the 20th of April 1770. As the Endeavour sailed north, he charted the coast, making first landfall at Botany Bay on the 29th of April 1770, 250 years ago. Cook also stopped at what has since been known as the town of 1770, before the Endeavour ran aground near Cooktown on the 11th of June. The ship was damaged and the voyage delayed while repairs were carried out. The ship then rounded Cape York, stopping at Possession Island in the Torres Strait on the 22nd of August. Just let me scroll down. Cook's exploration of the Pacific Ocean has left a profound legacy of scientific investigation, including the first large-scale hydrographic surveys and a significant contribution to the measurement of longitude. He is also revered for his superior seamanship and disciplined leadership. Now, I'm just going to share with you some other information as soon as I can find the arrow. Where is it? Oh, there it is. Okay. The tale of James Cook sailing the Endeavour into Botany Bay is familiar to most Australians, but 250 years on, the descendants of the Aboriginal people who first spotted the English explorer's ship say the history books got at least part of the story wrong. Our understanding of the events that unfolded on the afternoon of April 29, 1770, 250 years ago today, come mostly from journals of Captain Cook and his crew. They describe sailing into the harbour and being threatened and warned off by the indigenous people on the shore. Sidney Parkinson, a young artist employed on the ship, wrote in his journal that local men made threatening gestures with spears and yelled the words "Warra Warra way." He presumed that the words meant "go away." And for so many years, his diary entry defined the story of the first contact between Aboriginal people and the British. Now the Dharawal people are sharing their story. They say the real meaning of those first recorded Indigenous words has been misinterpreted. Warra is a root word for either white or dead in our language, said Ray Ingray, a Dharawal man and La Perou's local Aboriginal Land Council deputy chairperson. Over time, because of outsiders trying to tell our story for us, it's just being translated into different parts as "go away." If you're outside our community and trying to look in, you'll think it means "go away," but for us it means "you're all dead." Even worse. While those words might sound threatening or morbid, Mr. Ingray said it was likely just a warning to other locals at the time. So you can see there was a clear case for misunderstanding on both sides. When our old people saw the Endeavour coming through, they actually thought it was a low-lying cloud because all they could see was whiteness, white people. In Dharawal culture, that low-lying cloud means the spirits of the dead have returned to their country, and so they saw almost ghosts. So when the two men opposed the landing, they were protecting the country in a spiritual way from ghosts. This is a story of first contact that Ray Ingray wants more Australians to learn and understand. There is no taking away the significance of James Cook, clearly as an amazing explorer, so thank you for that. However, history shows that when lands are invaded, I challenge that, a lot of the true history is either wiped out or misrepresented. Well, that cuts both ways, Mr. Ingray. For a long time, our community has been saying that we need to tell our story our way. Yes, well, you can tell it any way you like. You've said that the Indigenous people came here 40,000 years ago. Now you're saying 60,000 years ago. Please make up your mind. He said Dharawal leaders are working with libraries, museums and linguists to re-evaluate some of the European records, in other words, rewrite history, and give a new perspective to Australian history. Yes, the far left wing view. When that happens, he says, when we stop people from misrepresenting our ancestors and our own story, we are able to give the broader Australian public a more authentic story, and a story that makes sense, really. Gweagal and Yuin woman Teresa Adler is also on a journey to educate Australians about her ancestors' story from that fateful day 250 years ago. Written records from Cook's crew make it clear a conflict occurred during that first meeting of two cultures. Yes, I agree with that. It was a conflict. Only a minor one, really, in the fair dinkum department. It wasn't an invasion. Journal entries describe the Aboriginal men threatening the crew until eventually gunshots are fired at them, but it is not made clear whether the local men lived or died. Miss Adler believes she is the descendant of a Gweagal warrior named Kuman, who was one of two men who defended his country from the British explorers. She said the oral history of the event passed down by her elders was different to the one in the history books. You're going to love this coming up. I was in high school in year 10 studying Cook, she said, and when we were reading a book that said the bullets were fired over their heads, I remember getting up in my class and saying, this is wrong, this is not the true history, because my grandfather was shot. She said this in 1970, her grandfather. For heaven's sake, that would have been 200 years earlier. So either the grandfather lived to 130 and her parents lived to about 100, 120. I mean, this would be laughed out of court. I said everyone needs to rip that page out of your book, she said. Miss Adler is now fighting for the possible physical evidence of the conflict to be returned to Australian shores. A bark shield pierced with a bullet hole, named the Guigal Shield, now sits in the British Museum. The British Museum states that it is suggested and not confirmed that the shield belonged to the warrior Cumin when he was shot at by Cook's landing party. We are still waiting to get that shield back, Miss Adler said. I want to work on some repatriation because it's that very spiritual connection we have with those objects. I have deep sadness leading up to this anniversary, and I've been very much reflecting on my ancestors. Our culture is not dead, it is living and thriving decades on. Now, let's see. Firstly, it would have been, if anything, her third or fourth great-grandfather, not grandfather. Now, I want to share from Cook's own entry what actually happened. If I can find it. Here we go. Sunday 29th. This is Captain Cook's diary entry. Sunday 29th in the afternoon, wind subtly and clear weather with which we stood in the bay. Actually, I might read it. Okay. This entry made into Cook's journal elaborates on the men, women and children Captain Cook saw from his boat, and while it was anchored, the interactions between himself and the natives became quite violent. After Cook and his crew members, Mr. Banks, Dr. Solander and Tupia, a native from Tahiti, pictured holding a tray of drinks in a famous painting once they landed, had no success in speaking with the natives. They did try dialogue, as they could not understand a word that was being said, even Tupia. He led them with nail beads, which they took up and seemed not displeased with. Cook was forced to fire 3 musket shots on the first day, one of them hitting an older native in the leg. The first shot he made was due to the natives coming to oppose him. The second shot was made after the natives threw a rock at him, and the third was fired because 2 of the natives threw spears at him. This source exemplifies the negative interactions between the natives and Cook when he first landed in Australia. While both parties acted in a violent manner, I do believe that the Aboriginals, acting out of confusion, were scared of the new people coming upon their land, and Captain Cook fired the first musket shot before the Aboriginals got violent, which was, in some opinions, unnecessary. Now, to give you some idea, when Bass and Flinders sailed the Tom Thumb around Australia to do the mapping of the actual shorelines, they had many interactions with the Aborigines too. And typical of the mentality back then, all efforts were made to be friendly at first. And if you study up on Bass and Flinders, Rob Mundell's got a great book on Bass and Flinders. You should read it, and you'll see their interactions with the natives, which would have been very similar to Cook's. And they had quite success in using body language to befriend some of the natives when they needed to find food and water, because there were long stretches in the Tom Thumb where Bass and Flinders had no water, and they were almost dying of thirst. So there's no way they would have been violent with the local natives themselves, because they needed cooperation. Now, there is another entry in Cook's journal where those beads that were mentioned, they were actually returned. The natives returned those beads to a hut of Cook's men, and that would seem to indicate that they either didn't want them or they couldn't accept them, maybe for some cultural reason. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I'm just trying to point out, at the end of the day, one Aboriginal was wounded in the leg with musket shot. Now, not bullets. Bullets would kill. It was like firing a rubber bullet or water cannon at a crowd to repel them or to keep them back, or like a warning shot. And so if you consider Captain Cook's landing in Botany Bay on April 29, 1770, 250 years ago, as an invasion because 3 warning shots were fired, hitting one native in the leg, and these natives were throwing spears, and I do believe one member of the British Party was actually killed. There's no mention of that. Then you're welcome to rewrite history as you see fit. But for me, I'm going back to the 200th anniversary in 1770 when I was 9 or 10 years old, and I was very, very proud of Captain Cook, and it was one of the first drawings I ever did in class with coloured pencils, and I was very excited to draw the Endeavour and a picture of Captain Cook in his fine uniform, and I believe Captain Cook is a hero. I believe, as even one of the Aboriginals said that I've quoted here, he was an amazing man, an amazing captain, an amazing seaman and a cartographer. And a cartographer, he wasn't even really a military man. Like, he wasn't a general. So it was like sending out an accountant. You don't send out an accountant to conquer a land. He was sent out to map Australia and to discover it as a possible colony to send the convicts, because in England it was overflowing with prisoners. They had to send the prisoners somewhere. Okay? It was not really to conquer the land and take it over and add to the empire. They had a big problem back then. They were overcrowding in their prisons. Read up on it. Read up on the years leading up to 1768 before they left Portsmouth. Read up on the reasons that the English left on those boats and came to Australia. Different thinking. You can't apply today's hypersensitivities to 250 years ago. It's just not fair. Anyway, this is Lord Reags' Rant of the Day, Volume 1, Number 8. And thank you for watching and thank you for listening. Peace, brothers.